last night at a film screening about Jan Karski, he said, which I thought was so important, is that governments don't have souls, but human beings do.
Right.
So the human beings working for the government need to get in touch with their souls on this issue.
Since Russia's assault against Ukraine in February 2022, tens of thousands of Ukrainian children have been forcibly abducted and taken to Russia and to nearby countries friendly to Russia, like Belarus. Most of these children have living relatives that, as you can imagine, are frantically searching for them. Today's guest has described this as the largest missing children's case since World War II. Hi, I'm Karla Jones, Senior Director of Federalism, Homeland Security, and International Relations here at ALEC.
Hi, I'm Brooklyn Roberts. I'm the Senior Director of the Health and Human Services Task Force here at ALEC.
And we are honored to have with us today Gillian Huebner, the Executive Director of Georgetown University's Collaborative on Global Children's Issues, to discuss this war crime being committed against Ukraine's most vulnerable citizens, its children. Welcome, Gillian.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, we met at a Ukraine House event earlier this year, and that's when I first heard you use the phrase largest missing children's case since World War II. Could you share with our listeners what Russia is doing, how long they've been abducting Ukrainian children? Because I suspect a lot of our viewers aren't aware of the extent of this problem.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And it is indeed a stunning figure. We know that at least 20,000 children have been forcibly removed from Ukraine to Russian-occupied territories, to the interior of Russia, and some to Belarus. And that's just since the full-scale invasion 2 years ago. But the practice of removing children from Ukraine has been going on since 2014, since Russia illegally occupied Crimea, and the fighting began in the eastern part of the country. So it's been going on for a while. We don't have exact numbers because, as you can imagine, access to the occupied territories and information about what's happening there is difficult. But we have 20,000 confirmed cases since the beginning of the full-scale invasion.
Children occupy a protected status under international law. Can you give us a little bit of background on the 1949 Geneva Convention and the Convention of the Rights of the Child, and tell us about that framework?
Yeah, I mean, international law is unambiguous, and a lot has been put in place since World War II to protect children in the midst of conflict. So the 1949 Geneva Convention recognized children as protected persons with protected status, and they are an object of special respect where particular laws are ascribed directly to them. The Fourth Geneva Convention provides specific language about the treatment of children who have been separated from their families, including those who've been evacuated. So it is very clear and prescriptive about what should happen for children in those situations. Resolution 1612, which is from 1999, from the United Nations Security Council, details 6 grave violations against children in conflict situations, and grave violation number 5 is the abduction of children from either state or non-state actors. And the Genocide Convention also states that this kind of forced removal of children is considered an act of genocide. And the ICC, the International Criminal Court, also has language around this. So it's clear the situation is defined and there's no ambiguity about it. So our duty to act and protect children in these situations is established.
Last year, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin as well as for Russia's Commissioner for Children's Rights. Have any other arrest warrants been issued? And what's being done to bring the kidnappers to justice?
Yeah, it's really tricky. Of course, establishing the war crime is one thing, and then holding those to account is another. In addition to these arrest warrants for Putin and Maria Lvova-Belova, there have also been a series of sanctions against individuals who have facilitated the forced deportation and abduction of these kids.
What's the Ukraine doing to get their children back? And have they been successful so far? Are they getting help from US and other allies?
Yeah, this is tricky as well, because while the international law is clear, the mechanisms for accountability and enforcement are weak. So when you have a rogue state that's not applying or obeying international law, it becomes much more complicated. But the Ukrainian government has set up the Bring Kids Back Ukraine Task Force, which is an international group of experts who are working on this. It's led by the Office of the President of Ukraine. They also have an international coalition of states, countries who are committed to helping. There's some track two, so behind the scenes negotiations going on, trying to leverage states that are not antagonistic to Russia to help them facilitate the returns. But it's very complicated because although international law says that Russia needs to identify who the children are, where they are, and establish contact between them and their caregivers, none of that's happening. So there's a lot of investigative work that's going on to try to identify where the children are, and from there to hopefully facilitate and negotiate their return. So, but to date, only 388 children of the 20,000 confirmed cases have been returned. So that's less than 2%.
In conversations we've had, Gillian, you've mentioned that time is not on the side of these children. Would you mind expanding on that, explaining what you mean by that? And also, would this be considered a genocide?
So time is not on the side of the children for sure, because first of all, they're kids, and every month that passes is critical to their development and well-being. So when we don't know where they are and can't establish contact with them, we lose the capacity to ensure their well-being and their protection. It is considered a genocide under the Genocide Convention. Forcibly removing children and not disclosing their whereabouts or allowing them contact with their caregivers is a confirmed act of genocide. And the US Congress has recognized it as such. They recently passed a resolution a number of weeks ago that calls out this act as an act of genocide.
Did that resolution get bipartisan support?
It absolutely did. It was, let's see, I can give you the representatives of both parties voted overwhelmingly in favor, 390 for the resolution, 9 against, and 32 abstained.
Why do you think this story is not covered more widely? I'm not sure all of our members really know that this is happening.
Yeah, that's a stunning question, and I think it's worthy of a lot of consideration. Because child abduction, child trafficking is considered a very bipartisan issue, with anyone with a pulse generally caring and coming out on the same side. I do not understand why this is not getting more attention, except that we live in echo chambers and news is covered in echo chambers. I don't think people fully understand what this means. Plus, there's also Russian propaganda that talks about this as a humanitarian act, that Russia is removing kids out of conflict and taking care of them. But even if you believe that, even if that is the intent behind some of the removals, they're still in violation of international law, which requires the state to say, okay, these are the children we have in our care. This is where they are. You can come and see to make sure that they're okay. And yes, of course, we will facilitate contact between these children and their caregivers. And none of that's happening.
It's absolutely no surprise that the Russian propaganda machine is working overtime to create false narratives. Are there any other false narratives that they're creating?
About the war in general, I think so, yes. One of the things that we're seeing happening is that some of the children of military age are being forcibly mobilized into Russian forces. So they have camps that are training them to actually fight against their homeland. And so the brainwashing that's going on of these kids to say Ukraine doesn't actually exist. Actually, your parents don't want you back. Your language actually doesn't exist. You need to learn, you need to speak only Russian and get beaten if you speak Ukrainian. These are all stories that Russia is telling. And some people in the United States believe them.
Is there anything happening in the United States on the federal level to address this issue?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as I mentioned, House Resolution 149 passed with an overwhelming majority, which was condemning the illegal abduction and forcible transfer of children from Ukraine to the Russian Federation. There's a Senate resolution, a twin resolution, which has not passed yet. And it was introduced a year ago. So that needs to happen. But these resolutions do not commit the United States to act. One would say, however, because the resolutions acknowledge that this is an act of genocide, under the responsibility to protect, once we've recognized an act of genocide, we're duty bound to do something to prevent it. So the gap between these resolutions and the US government's continued support for Ukraine is very wide, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. I think all experts agree that the abduction of children and their return is not going to, the abduction of children will continue and the return will not happen until Ukraine is victorious. And that's looking potentially unlikely at the moment, given the lack of support.
Gillian, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, yes. So first of all, this is the 30th anniversary of the genocide in Rwanda. And following after the genocide in the Balkans as well. It's the 20th anniversary of the genocide in Darfur. And following those atrocities, and then in 2005, the member states of the United Nations agreed that we have a duty, a responsibility to protect, to prevent genocides. Because what we know is in World War II, during the Holocaust, during Rwanda, during Srebrenica, in Darfur, the international community was extremely slow to respond, which allowed the atrocities to escalate. That's happening again now. Despite knowing what we know, despite the international laws, despite having information about what's happening, the international community is once again very slow to respond and to stop this. And children, innocent children, are bearing the brunt of our inaction.
Thank you, Gillian, for joining us today. I think a lot of our members probably had no idea that this was going on, and children are so important to us, and it's something that I think they really needed more education about. So, women leaders like you are the reason that Karla and I started this series, and we just want to commend you for your work and thank you again for being with us.